The storm was relentless. The kind of storm that made the wind scream through the trees and the rain fall in sheets, blurring everything in sight. Thunder cracked like a whip, shaking the very earth. Emergency lights from police cars and fire trucks painted the wet streets in alternating flashes of red and blue, making everything feel surreal. Officer David Parker's flashlight sliced through the chaos at Miller's Creek, where a crowd had already gathered despite the ferocious downpour. The desperate cries of a mother echoed through the storm, mingling with the howling winds. The child. Someone save the child. 6-year-old Tommy Williams had been swept away by the fast-moving waters of the creek, his tiny hand barely visible above the churning current. In the midst of the panic, a blur of black and tan shot past the police barricade. Jack, the Thompson family's German shepherd, who had been missing for weeks, plunged into the violent water without a second thought. In the few seconds that felt like eternity, Jack fought the current with every muscle, emerging from the water moments later with Tommy's collar gently gripped in his mouth, dragging the unconscious child to safety. But in the frenzy that followed, paramedics working frantically to revive Tommy, the Williams family in hysterics, and a gathering crowd, it was easy to miss Jack's disappearance. The storm had swept him away again, this time not as a family pet, but as a hero lost to the wind and the rain. The only one who noticed Jack's vanishing was Emily Thompson, standing at her window miles away, unaware that her loyal companion had just saved a life before vanishing into the night. But the next morning, the headlines told a very different story. Vicious dog attacks child, local family's pet on the loose. The headline was accompanied by a grainy, unflattering photo of Jack taken months ago. Sarah Williams, Tommy's mother and a newly elected city council member, wasted no time casting Jack as the villain. "That beast dragged my son into the creek," she declared on the local news, her voice shaking with manufactured fear. "We've warned the Thompsons about their dangerous dog before. Now, look what's happened." The truth that Tommy had been playing near the creek against his mother's warnings remained buried beneath the tidal wave of accusations. The community, already on edge from a previous pit bull attack 3 years earlier, was quick to rally against Jack. Social media exploded with demands for action, and old reports of dog attacks resurfaced. The storm outside was nothing compared to the storm of controversy that was about to flood Maple Street. Emily couldn't comprehend what was happening. The dog she loved, the dog who had been her protector, her best friend, was being painted as a monster. At school, her desk was vandalized with crude drawings of snarling dogs. Former friends avoided her, and even her teacher's smile seemed forced. That evening, Emily sat by her window, staring out at the relentless rain. Her parents' voices grew louder from downstairs, the arguments growing more bitter. "I can't live like this," Robert, her mother, Catherine, declared. The phone calls, the threats, Emily crying herself to sleep, all because you insisted on keeping that dog. "Please, no," her father, Robert, pleaded. "I'm not going to let them take him down for something he didn't do." But as the rain continued to fall, the cracks in their family deepened. The fight had only just begun, and the world outside had already turned its back on the Thompsons, just as the community had turned on Jack. It wasn't always like this. There was a time when their world felt perfect, when Jack was the heart of the Thompson family. Robert and Catherine had adopted him when he was just a puppy, and from the moment he bounded into their lives, he became more than just a pet. He was their daughter's guardian angel. Every morning, Jack would wait by the back door, his tail wagging with boundless energy, eager to begin his day. Emily, even at 4 years old, would always find comfort in his presence. If she had a nightmare, Jack would appear, quietly sitting by her side, offering her the comfort she needed without a word. By 6, their bond had become unbreakable. He was there for every milestone, every laugh, every tear. The Thompson family's backyard was their sanctuary, where Jack orchestrated games of hide and seek and would never let Emily out of his sight. Even when they went to the park, Jack knew exactly where to stand, protectively between Emily and any perceived threat, but always gentle, even when neighborhood children petted him. Neighbors often marveled at how perfect Jack was. Dr. Anderson, their veterinarian, would remark that in all his years of practice, he had never seen such a perfect balance of protectiveness and gentleness in a German Shepherd. Jack was more than a dog. He was part of the family's fabric, holding them together in ways they could never have imagined. But all that changed in the wake of that storm. A community that once saw Jack as a guardian angel now saw him as a threat. The media sensationalized the story, painting Jack as a ticking time bomb, and the Thompsons found themselves on the defensive. Emily, who had always been proud of her bond with Jack, was now forced to question the very nature of the world around her. Was her dog truly dangerous? Could it be that everyone was right? Was Jack to blame? The storm didn't just change Jack's life. It began to unravel the fabric of their family. Emily found herself alone, watching as her parents grew more distant from one another, and the love that had once held them together now seemed like a distant memory. Jack was gone, and with him, everything that had made their lives feel whole. But deep down, Emily knew something the world didn't. Jack had saved Tommy. Jack wasn't the villain. He was the hero. But it would take a lot more than just her belief in him to bring the truth to light. The storm had passed, but the damage it left in its wake was far from over. As the days wore on, the Thompsons' lives were increasingly consumed by the battle to clear Jack's name. Robert Thompson, once a respected defense attorney in Maple Creek, found himself in uncharted territory, fighting for the truth, not in a courtroom, but in the court of public opinion. And this time, the stakes were higher than ever. Social media had become the battleground. News outlets, eager to stoke the fire of sensationalism, played on the fears of a community that had already suffered one traumatic attack. The images of Jack, his dark eyes staring out from the headlines, were used to perpetuate the narrative of a dangerous, wild animal. Headlines screamed, "Family dog turns vicious," and online petitions for Jack's capture and euthanasia spread like wildfire. The digital world, once a place for community connection, had turned into a place of fear and judgment. A Facebook group dedicated to Maple Street was flooded with warnings about dangerous breeds, with Jack's image plastered across every post. The group, once a place of neighborhood updates, had become a toxic space, a breeding ground for fear-mongering, and Sarah Williams had capitalized on it. Emily felt like she was losing her mind. Every day, she saw the world she once knew crumble. Her friends at school, who had once looked up to her, now avoided her. The whispers behind her back, the cruel taunts written in chalk on her locker, "Monsters girl," they all gnawed at her soul. At home, the atmosphere was just as strained. Her parents fought constantly, their arguments often turning into bitter, whispered exchanges when Emily was within earshot. She heard the faint sound of her parents' voices rising in the kitchen below. She couldn't make out the words, but the tone was unmistakable. They were on the brink of falling apart. The next morning, as Robert walked out the door to his office, he gave Emily a quick kiss on the forehead. "I'll be back soon, kiddo," he said, his voice tight with the strain of everything they were going through. But his footsteps sounded heavy as they faded away down the hallway. Emily sat at the window again, staring out at the empty backyard, remembering Jack's comforting presence. She could still see him in the corner of her mind, his protective gaze, his gentle nature that had made him her best friend. He had always known when she needed him. But now Jack was gone, and with him, it felt like a part of her had been torn away. But Emily wasn't the only one suffering. Catherine, her mother, who had once been the calm in the storm of family life, now seemed a shadow of her former self. Her eyes, once filled with dreams and purpose, now reflected nothing but worry. The house felt cold without Jack's warmth, and Catherine's work as a counselor had become a lifeline, a distraction from the unraveling world at home. But the truth was, she was just as lost as Emily. Robert, too, was struggling. The once proud lawyer, a man of facts and logic, found himself tangled in emotions and uncertainty. He tried to maintain his composure in front of his family. But every time he opened the door to his office, the weight of the legal documents, the emails from reporters, the phone calls from his clients, all of it weighed him down. And still, there was no sign of Jack. Despite the media frenzy, The Thompsons didn't give up on their dog. Robert, never one to back down from a fight, threw himself into finding the truth. He began to sift through old records, digging into past dog-related incidents in the area, hoping to find something that could help. But as the weeks passed, the search for Jack became less about rescuing him and more about rescuing the family's reputation. Jack's disappearance was no longer just about the dog. It was about the collapse of everything they had built, their community, their family, their future. The media's portrayal of Jack as a dangerous animal had caused a ripple effect in Maple Creek. Businesses distanced themselves, no longer willing to stand by the dog who had once been welcomed with open arms. But Robert refused to accept defeat. His legal mind began to piece together inconsistencies in the case. The local authorities were dismissing evidence that didn't fit their narrative. They had written Jack off as a threat long before they even knew the truth. He knew he had to fight back, not just for Jack, but for his family. At night, when the house grew quiet and Emily was tucked into bed, Robert sat in front of his computer, poring over every detail of the case. He started to uncover patterns, inconsistencies in the reports that suggested something wasn't right. Slowly, piece by piece, the truth began to emerge, and with it, the hope that they could find Jack, if only they could get the authorities to listen. Emily, meanwhile, had started her own investigation. Every night, after her mother thought she was asleep, Emily would take her phone out of the drawer, quietly researching everything she could about German Shepherds, about missing pets, about rescues. She had started a blog called Jack's Journey, where she documented everything she learned. People started reading her posts, people who believed Jack was innocent, who supported the Thompsons. Through the blog, Emily connected with other pet owners who had faced similar battles. She discovered that the truth about dogs like Jack was often twisted by people with their own agendas. The more she learned, the more she understood that Jack wasn't the villain. He was a hero, a dog who had saved lives, who had been there for everyone, but now had become the scapegoat for the community's fear. But the truth was hard to uncover. It was buried beneath layers of misinformation and prejudice. Despite Emily's growing resolve, the weight of everything she carried, the fear of losing Jack forever, the betrayal of her own community began to take its toll. The pressure to move on from her parents, to let go of the hope that Jack would ever come back, was overwhelming. She spent her days lost in her thoughts, replaying every moment with Jack over and over in her mind, wondering if she would ever see him again. Yet, despite the overwhelming odds, Emily's determination didn't falter. She knew Jack was out there, somewhere. He had to be, and no matter what the world said, she would never stop searching for him. The search for Jack had become a battle of wits, a fight not just for a dog's freedom, but for the truth to rise above the noise of a misinformed and fearful world. While the rest of Maple Creek had moved on, convinced by the media frenzy and public pressure, the Thompsons and their few loyal allies refused to let go. Emily, still clutching hope with every ounce of her being, spent every waking moment piecing together clues, connecting dots that the authorities had missed, and turning her grief into action. Robert, too, dove deeper into his investigation, using his legal expertise to expose the gaps in the case. But it was becoming increasingly clear that there were forces at play far larger than he had anticipated, forces that didn't want the truth to be known. As the months passed, the emotional toll on the Thompson family continued to mount. Catherine's return to Maple Creek hadn't mended the cracks in their marriage. She had hoped that distance from the constant pressure of the media would help heal their wounds, but it only magnified the rift between her and Robert. They had become strangers to each other, speaking more out of necessity than love. Every argument felt like a betrayal, and every silence screamed louder than words. Emily, caught in the middle of the tension, had started to retreat even further. She kept a low profile at school, her grades slipping as the weight of the world bore down on her. But the dark days of isolation also fueled something in her. She wasn't just fighting for Jack anymore. She was fighting for her family, for the future they could have if they just got through this nightmare. One morning, as Emily was scrolling through the online forums for clues, she stumbled across something that made her heart skip a beat. A local animal rights activist, Rachel Morgan, had launched a campaign to find Jack. The hashtag Find Jack Thompson was slowly picking up steam. It wasn't much, but it was something. Someone was out there who still believed in Jack's innocence. The momentum began to build, and soon Emily found herself in touch with Rachel, who offered her resources and connections to keep the search alive. At the same time, Robert's investigation had led him to an uncomfortable conclusion. His search for inconsistencies in the official records had turned up something unexpected. A series of doctored reports from the night Jack had rescued Tommy. The time-stamped security footage from nearby businesses, which had originally been declared unavailable due to malfunctions, had been deliberately altered. But who was behind the cover-up? The deeper Robert dug, the more he began to understand that this wasn't just a case of a dog being falsely accused. It was a political power play. Sarah Williams, the city councilwoman, had been manipulating the narrative from the start, using her influence to push through legislation that would restrict certain breeds of dogs. She was a woman driven by fear and old wounds, and Jack had become the perfect pawn in her larger game. But Robert wasn't about to let that stop him. Armed with new evidence, he hired a private investigator, Detective Michael Roberts, who specialized in cold cases and had a particular talent for finding overlooked details. Michael's first move was to dig into the records from the night of the storm. What they found was staggering. Eyewitness testimony from the paramedics who had been at the scene, statements that had never made it into the official report. According to their notes, Tommy had been playing near the creek long before Jack had appeared, and the child's injuries were consistent with water rescue protocols, not an attack. With this new evidence, Robert was ready to confront the authorities, but they weren't going to make it easy. As Robert continued to press, he discovered that his legal reputation, once unassailable, was now under attack. His clients were pulling back, avoiding the media circus that had followed him and his family. His law practice, once thriving, had become a shell of what it had been. Emily, now in constant contact with Rachel Morgan and the small group of supporters who had rallied around her cause, began to feel the stirrings of hope. If the community could see Jack for what he truly was, a hero, then maybe the tide would turn. Her research led her to something that she had missed before. There were reports of Jack being spotted around the outskirts of town, reports from people who didn't know him, who had no reason to defend him. A local farmer, Carl Davidson, had seen a large German shepherd helping stray animals and guiding them to safety during storms. Another report came from a shelter worker in Henderson County who had witnessed Jack lead an injured beagle to the front door of their shelter. With this new information, Emily reached out to Carl, hoping he could offer more answers. To her surprise, Carl had been quietly helping Jack since the stormy night he had disappeared. The farmer had witnessed Jack's acts of kindness firsthand, and he had been discreetly providing the dog with food and shelter, respecting Jack's need to remain hidden while continuing his work of service. It was Carl who revealed the most shocking information of all. Jack had been keeping an eye on his family from a distance. During the times when the Thompson house had been under attack, Jack had been lurking just outside, watching over them as only he knew how. He had never abandoned them. He was simply waiting for the right moment to return. When Emily learned this, it felt like a weight had been lifted from her chest. Jack hadn't run away. He had stayed. He had never given up on them. And now, with the truth starting to spread, the momentum was finally building. The community was waking up to the reality that Jack was not the villain in this story. He was the hero. Robert's legal battles were far from over, but for the first time in months, he felt like they were finally fighting on the right side, armed with new allies, fresh evidence, and the unwavering belief that Jack's innocence would prevail. The Thompsons set their sights on one goal, to bring Jack home. But even as the truth began to surface, they knew the hardest part was still ahead. The community that had turned on them would not easily forgive, and the scars from the past months would take time to heal. But one thing was certain, they would never give up on Jack. Not now. Not ever. The battle for Jack's truth was not one of simple victories, but a slow, painstaking process. Each day, Emily would rise before the sun, armed with her journal and laptop, poring over every detail she could find about Jack's history, about German shepherds, about missing pets and miraculous returns. Her heart ached as she reviewed the photos of Jack, his smiling face, his eyes full of intelligence and loyalty. But as she scrolled through the pages of their memories, she also felt a surge of determination. She was fighting not just for Jack, but for herself, for her family, and for everything they had lost. Robert, too, had begun to see a shift. The mounting pressure from the community and media had started to take a toll on his career. Long-term clients were withdrawing, and his legal practice, once thriving, was crumbling under the weight of a public scandal. But he couldn't stop fighting. The search for Jack had become his singular focus, and with the new evidence they had uncovered, Robert knew they were closer than ever to proving Jack's innocence. The community had been fed lies for too long, and now it was time to expose the truth. But the journey to vindication was far from simple. There were people in the town, including Sarah Williams and her coalition of supporters, who had built their reputations on Jack's guilt. They would do everything in their power to maintain the narrative that Jack was dangerous, that he didn't belong in Maple Creek. The deeper Robert dug, the more it became clear that there were forces behind the scenes, pulling strings and manipulating the truth. It wasn't just about a dog, it was about a political agenda. As the weeks passed, the Thompsons received an unexpected ally in their quest for justice, Dr. Rachel Cooper, a veterinarian who had known Jack since he was a puppy. Dr. Cooper had always admired Jack's gentle nature and impeccable training, and she was unwilling to let the lies stand. She came forward with a sworn statement, offering her professional testimony about Jack's history of service and behavior. Her words were a breath of fresh air, a light in the darkness that had surrounded the Thompsons for so long. But the tides of public opinion were slow to change. The more the Thompsons fought to clear Jack's name, the more they realized that the media's narrative was powerful, far-reaching, and difficult to undo. The news stations, once quick to condemn Jack, were now scrambling to cover their tracks. The shift in public opinion came slowly, but it was undeniable. Emily's voice, quiet but determined, had started to rise above the noise, offering a perspective that the media had missed. Jack was a hero. He was not a threat. He was the dog who had saved a child, who had served his community, who had loved his family unconditionally. In the midst of the battle, Emily learned of a breakthrough. Carl Davidson, the local farmer who had been quietly helping Jack during his time away from home, had documented Jack's activities over the months. Carl had kept a journal, detailing every sighting of Jack, every rescue he had assisted with, and every act of kindness the dog had shown. Jack had helped strays, guided injured animals to safety, and even assisted in rescue operations during storms. His actions were not just those of a lost dog trying to survive, they were the actions of a hero. Carl's journal was a key piece of evidence, and Emily wasted no time in reaching out to him. When she arrived at his farm, Carl greeted her with a warm smile, but there was a sadness in his eyes, as if he had known this day would come, but dreaded it nonetheless. "I've been waiting for you, Emily," Carl said, leading her to a small wooden desk where his journal lay open. "I knew Jack was special. He was always more than just a dog." The journal chronicled Jack's every move since the night of the storm. There were detailed accounts of Jack's protective nature, his understanding of his family's needs, and his uncanny ability to help others. But perhaps the most important part of the journal was Carl's final entry. It read, "Jack isn't lost. He's been watching over his family, even now. He's waiting for the right moment to come home." As Emily read those words, a mix of emotions flooded her heart. She felt relief, knowing that Jack had never abandoned them, but she also felt a deep sadness. The world had turned on Jack, and in doing so, it had torn apart her family. But now, with the journal in hand and the truth beginning to unfold, Emily knew that it wasn't too late to fix what had been broken. With Carl's testimony and Dr. Cooper's statement, Robert was able to build a case that the community could no longer ignore. The evidence pointed to the fact that Jack's actions on the night of Tommy's rescue were consistent with trained rescue behavior, not aggression. The truth was clear. Jack had saved a life. The accusations against him were unfounded, and it was time for the town of Maple Creek to realize it. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place when a security camera footage expert, David Martinez, came forward. David had been working to restore footage from cameras near the creek and had uncovered a crucial piece of evidence. A video that clearly showed Tommy near the creek before Jack even arrived, playing alone. The video also captured Jack's precise, calculated approach as he rescued Tommy, navigating the water with the skill of a trained rescuer. The footage was irrefutable. When the video was released, it was like a bombshell. The community, once so quick to turn against Jack, was now faced with undeniable proof that he was a hero. The public outcry was immediate, but this time it wasn't against Jack. It was against the lies that had been told about him. As the truth spread, the Thompsons found themselves at the center of a movement for justice. It wasn't just about Jack anymore. It was about the power of truth and the resilience of a family that refused to be broken. The Thompsons had weathered the storm, and now they were finally beginning to heal. But the road to redemption wasn't easy. Even as the community started to rally behind Jack's name, there were still those who clung to their prejudices, who refused to acknowledge the facts. Sarah Williams, now under intense scrutiny, doubled down on her stance. She continued to advocate for breed-specific legislation, but now her support was dwindling. The truth had a way of catching up with even the most powerful of lies. For the Thompsons, though, there was a sense of closure beginning to form. They knew that bringing Jack home wasn't just about the dog. It was about healing the rifts in their family, about rebuilding the trust they had lost. They had learned that even in the darkest of times, love and truth could still shine through. Emily, standing at the front porch of their home one cold autumn morning, knew that the day was coming when Jack would return. And when he did, their family would finally be whole again. The morning air was crisp, tinged with the scent of autumn leaves and the anticipation of something long awaited. The storm had passed, but the emotional clouds still hung low over Maple Creek. Emily stood at the front porch, staring out at the quiet street, her heart a mix of hope and uncertainty. She had fought so hard for this moment, for Jack, for her family, for herself. And yet, the silence felt deafening. The town had been through so much: lies, accusations, betrayals, and now the truth was out. The media had shifted, the public opinion had changed, and the community was starting to acknowledge Jack's heroism. But as the days went on, the Thompsons found themselves navigating new challenges. Healing, it seemed, was never as simple as the truth coming to light. Despite the growing support from the community, there were still whispers in the corners of Maple Creek. The scars left by Sarah Williams' campaign ran deep, and while some had begun to come around, others remained entrenched in their fear and prejudice. The town's divisions were far from healed, and the Thompsons knew that even with the truth, it would take time for the wounds to close. But there was a shift in the air that day, an undeniable sense that something was about to change. The local shelter had received a tip about a German shepherd seen roaming near the outskirts of town, a large black and tan dog with unmistakable markings. Emily's heart skipped a beat when she heard the news. She had to see for herself. With her parents by her side and the search parties now working together, Emily found herself retracing Jack's footsteps back to the woods, to the places he had once wandered, back to the places that had once been home. They drove for hours, through the rain and the muddy roads, until they reached the edge of the woods where the tip had originated. The sight of a familiar, but much different, landscape made Emily's chest tighten. The place was quiet, eerily quiet, but it felt like a beacon of hope, like Jack had left a trail for them to follow. Then, out of the mist, he appeared. Jack! It wasn't a moment of fanfare or dramatic reunions. Instead, it was as if Jack had known exactly when to come back. He walked toward them with steady, purposeful strides, his dark eyes locked onto Emily's, as if confirming everything they had believed. He was home. In that moment, the weight of the past months, the heartbreak, the confusion, all of it seemed to dissolve. Jack, with his powerful presence, was standing in front of her, just as he had always been, the protector, the companion, the loyal friend who never truly left. Emily stepped forward, her breath caught in her throat. She had practiced this moment in her mind countless times, imagining how it would feel when Jack finally came home. But this was something different. The bond they shared, forged in the darkest of times, had only grown stronger with every day apart. With a gentle but determined movement, Emily reached out her hand, just as she had done in the past. Jack, true to form, approached her slowly, his steps measured, as if testing the waters before finally allowing himself to believe it was real. When Jack's nose brushed against her palm, the floodgates opened. The emotions that had been held back for so long, grief, guilt, hope, relief, poured out in a wave of tears. Emily crouched down, her arms wrapping around Jack's neck as she buried her face in his fur. "I knew you'd come back," she whispered, her voice breaking with emotion. The reunion was tender, quiet, and profound. But it wasn't just Jack returning. It was the healing of a family, a community, and a journey that had taken them through the hardest of times. As the day unfolded, the Thompson family found themselves surrounded by a group of neighbors, supporters, and those who had once turned away from them. People who had seen Jack as a threat now looked at him with awe, realizing the truth they had been too blind to see. Jack had never been the enemy. He had been a hero all along. The emotional weight of the past few months began to lift, replaced by the dawning realization that the Thompson family could rebuild. With Jack by their side, they knew they could face whatever came next. They would heal, not just as a family, but as a community. But the journey wasn't over. The story of Jack's return wasn't just about a dog coming home. It was about redemption, about learning from the mistakes of the past, and about finding a way to live in truth and love despite the obstacles. The Thompsons knew that they still had work to do. They had to rebuild their trust, heal the wounds caused by fear and prejudice, and learn to live in the light of their shared experiences. The community's healing would take time, but with Jack's return, they had seen a glimpse of what was possible, of what could happen when love, loyalty, and truth prevailed over fear and division. The town of Maple Creek would never be the same, but perhaps, in time, that wasn't such a bad thing. With Jack's presence, there was hope for something better, something more united, more compassionate, and more just. As we reflect on the story of Jack's journey, we're reminded of the power of resilience, the importance of standing up for the truth, and the healing that comes when we choose love and loyalty over fear. Like Emily, we all face challenges that test our strength, but in the end, it's our faith, our courage, and our determination that lead us to victory. What lessons have you learned from Jack's story? How do you handle moments of hardship and adversity in your life? Share your thoughts below, and if you're moved by Jack's incredible journey, don't forget to subscribe to the HeartForce channel for more inspiring dog stories.